Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Dax. We are recording now. We are in week 8, and welcome back to class. How is everybody out there today? All righty then. It is lecture 2 in week 8, and today is going to be all about decommissioning IT assets. And before we get going, I want to let you guys know that we have, let's see, this 8, we have 3 more weeks left of class. And so if you are falling behind for any reason, reach out to me, let me know what's going on with you, and let me know if I can help you in any way. I can answer questions, point you to the right resources, give you the assistance that you need. I want to see everybody in our class succeed to the best of your high potential. And so with that, I just want to encourage everybody out there to take advantage of our class layout and myself, and really dig in and get some work going if you haven't already. So we are looking at decommissioning assets. So if you haven't gone to lecture 1 in week 8, make sure you do that. We've got 22 days left in our class, and just looking at the grade book right now, it appears that most of you have submitted deliverable 2 and 3. More than half of you got 4 and 5. So you're doing pretty good. There's a few more things out there that a couple of you haven't done. So let me know if you have questions or need any assistance. I want to see you guys really rock this thing really well and close out with a strong performance. So today I'm going to get this thing pulled up. Get your presentation ready. We're talking about asset management decommissions, and we'll talk about what that means. So our objectives before we do any of the decommissioning, we'll talk about the deliverable 6 expectations. So if you have any questions about that, maybe they'll be answered in this talk. We'll talk about client issues and challenges with decommissioning assets, why we actually do this, what it is, and the impacts of decommissioning, as well as a summary and benefits of decommissions. But before we get our feet too far into the water there, I wanted to talk about deliverable 6. Every week or two, we try to cover the expectations of your uploads, and this is no different. Deliverable 6 is where you start to take the things that we've learned so far and gel them together into a good paper. The instructions for deliverable 6 are to create a report that consists of plans to reallocate and decommission legacy hardware that considers potential risks. And it asks you to take an objective look at all the potential pros and cons inside various backup and replication strategies for business continuity planning with emerging and future trends in server storage. So you will create a plan to reallocate and decommission legacy hardware that distinguishes potential risks. So distinguish key concepts related to infrastructure hardware and state the potential risks to the new data center. You'll create strategies for business continuity planning, examine backup strategies for business continuity planning, and examine replication strategies for business continuity planning. If you are unfamiliar with replication, go back to our first 2 weeks. We discussed backups and replications, and that will help you flesh out your paper. You'll evaluate emerging and future trends in server storage. So we're going to ask you to take a look ahead and see where the industry is going. What do you think will be some speculative technologies? What is on the horizon? You can do your research and maybe extrapolate some of your own. You will evaluate future trends in servers and evaluate future trends in storage. So if you have questions about any of that, or you need tips, help, resources, or anything, let me know. But let's talk about decommissioning. So on the subject of decommissions, why do that? Well, decommissions mitigate challenges of legacy system tape restoration management. Additionally, it provides a defensible approach to managing tape restore requests, and expert management and consultative support for the legal team. It'll reduce costs associated with legacy environments. By reducing operational costs, things like power, AC, infrastructure, and security required to run the systems. It eliminates the costs associated with the legacy software and hardware maintenance, and eliminate labor and time spent by IT staff to administer and monitor the systems. And it provides better support for new technologies and data center evolution. It relieves IT staff of the burden of maintaining legacy systems and tapes and frees up data center floor, rack, and infrastructure space. So if you haven't caught on to it by now, decommissioning basically speaks to the process of turning down equipment, removing power and the actual physical components, getting them out of the way. Decommissions happen when equipment becomes outmoded, outdated, and overworked to the point that customers are moved to other server equipment. It does happen, and things age out, and it becomes important to turn down the service. Now, this happens after the service is turned off or reassigned or reallocated to other server and other nodes. You would not decommission anything that has customers on it, obviously, but we'll talk about that. The impacts of decommissioning are here. Kind of hard to read for you, but we'll go over some of this. As far as the logistic and physical impact of decommissioning, it helps to remove overhead hardware and software, and helps to create space with the floor space and reduce the load on air conditioning, battery charges, that kind of thing. In terms of human resources, whenever there's less equipment, it follows that you need fewer resources in terms of people and software, daily oversight. It makes it an easier process to maintain. There are different approaches to decommissioning. One approach is going over like this. Phase one is a requirements capture. Basically, it examines what the client provides in terms of their expectations, their needs. It's a technical environment specifications look and management procedures. Takes a look at the workflow overview, chain of custody review, and other detailed requirements. Sometimes it's organization supported. So company experts will internally collaborate together with the client to document any technical specifications based on manufacturer specs and historical information, management procedures, documentation available in chain of custody and workflow. So there's a collaborative workflow together that helps the company and the client be on the same page. In the second phase, in the build out and validation phase, here the team replicates environment at the data center and uses the defined procedures from phase one to run a mutually agreeable validation test. So you're going to create a duplicate of the data and all of the provisioning in order to make sure that if you rebuild it from scratch, you have all the materials there ready to go. And in phase three, the transition and ongoing management. Basically here, the client decommissions on-site systems and IT support takes on ongoing research management, request management rather. A level of outsourced management is defined based on client requirements and information gathered in earlier phases. Now, we're going to work with clients to understand the source technology environments and the processes to be decommissioned. You'll utilize phone interviews as well as questionnaires to help facilitate the build out of environment for phases 2 and 3. Some of the information provided by the client as part of the analysis phase includes things like the range of data, the number of custodians, and email formats, as well as backup software version information. And this will include any licensing information that's available, tape formats, and anticipated volume of tape restoration and discovery services that are required. This should be all a matter of record, but it's important to validate and ensure that the client is on the same page. In phase 1B, the requirements capture, you will deploy experts on site to formally assess and define the current and required processes for media restoration, email extractions, and electronic discovery. Key objectives include, but are not limited to, define and document, utilizing proven defensible chain of custody processes for restoration protocols, developing a set of project reports for the tracking of the key information required for the engagement, and define any and all contact points internally for project management, reporting, and escalation as required. Assess and build out requirements with the client team and feasibility for remote access to the system. During phase 2, the build out and validation, you will implement the destination hosted environment at a US or UK data center. Work with the client to validate that the environment and workflow are validated. And this will include establishing a list of certification and testing requirements of the clients prior to the decommission, working with the client to follow best practices to ensure a successful and complete backup of the source environment, run a validation test that spans from request initiation through project delivery. And this will include testing the light on the fibers if they are involved and ensuring that the distance tracks on both sides, the transmit and the receive. You'll run what is called a scope test, which is where you want to make sure that everything's clean, and determine the decommissioning schedule and timeline with the go live date and contractual framework for managed services. And upon completion of the implementation and testing, the legacy system can be officially decommissioned and will begin phase 3. And phase 3 is the transition and ongoing management. Manage the replicated decommissioned environment restorations as well as other duties that are agreed upon. The activities can include intake source media from the client while maintaining strict chain of custody documentation, restoration of designated custodian data from the media, and provide additional services, including deduplication, keyword searches as requested, and others. Deliver restored data on the appropriate encrypted destination media, and restore and store data offline for future litigation requests as required, and provide appropriate reports and documentation to clients, including project status reports, chain of custody documentation, project closure reports, etc. This will include any sign-off documentation and return client-side source media. So let's summarize the benefits of decommissioning. It will drastically reduce costs to support and maintain legacy or inherited environments. Remember that even if you're just decommissioning one relay rack out of a series of a couple of dozen, the power source is shared by all in a series system. And so one taken out will reduce the watt hours that are needed to run the equipment. The same thing is true for heating and cooling needs, as well as troubleshooting. You can focus on day-to-day operational duties without the burden of maintaining legacy, vendor expired hardware and software support. And that really is a thing. Hardware is typically maintained far beyond the manufacturer warranty. And so decommissioning reduces the headache of dealing with that and having to research old documents that might or might not be available online. And is a cost-effective manner of providing legal, disaster recovery, and operational requirements against antiquated environments while offering a trusted system. And an archiving strategy for decommissioned systems. Let's talk about that. First, I wanted to show you this strip here. This guy going into record retention. I love Dilbert, the guy that actually created and drew the comic strip, worked at Pac Bell for many years, and you can tell there's a very strong familiarity here. He is giving the guy documents to be dealt with. These valuable documents should be stored for 5 years. And he leaves. And what happens is what we assume happens a lot of times. This job gets so much easier when I realize that nobody actually asks for anything back. Unfortunately, this isn't too far from the truth in some cases. Hopefully that doesn't happen in your organization. So let's talk about the what and when of decommissioning. So decommissioning basically is a process by which a business application is removed from use. That's the most basic definition. It's turning down the equipment and removing it from service and physically getting it out of the space. It requires the analysis of the system and the identification of what information is stored or transmitted or received there, what metadata is available, and system documentation that must be brought forward and retained. And a system should be decommissioned when the system is either replaced by a new target system covering the exact same functionality, or it becomes obsolete because it no longer supports the business process. Systems and applications are targeted to be commissioned. The data contained within such systems may be needed to be retained. The organizational data and preservation archival strategy will vary depending on the type of data and records retention needs. So it will basically vary from organization to organization and the business units within each organization. They'll have unique needs that are on a case-by-case basis. So the systems and applications are targeted uniquely. So there is an assumption that system decommissioning is difficult, expensive, and sometimes unnecessary or a waste of time. So one argument says we need all that legacy data anyway. It's easier and cheaper to just keep the legacy system. So the challenge is one-off, difficult, expensive decommissioning. And the mitigation for that is understand that it can become, upon reflection, a repeatable, efficient, rapid decommissioning service model. And there are some employees that will put their head in the sand and basically refuse to have anything to do with it. So to mitigate that, define decommissioning and archiving approaches up front when a new system is being developed. So upon the introduction of new legacy equipment, you can start to build the case before and plant those seeds that the old legacy equipment can be decommissioned and removed from service so that it's not a sudden thing. And some people will assume that all data must be maintained. So the mitigation for that is understanding the business process driving the perceived need to retain the legacy system and data. So in some situations, you will retain all the data, but why? So the triggers and prerequisites to retain the data and records looks a little like this. It can be legal triggers, fiscal, regulatory business requirements to retain records. Could be a part of a normal business process for that organization. It will require approval of record, closure of project documents, and so forth. System decommissioning processes and system performance and capacity constraints, mergers, acquisitions, divestitures. All of these situations can create a trigger to duplicate and retain records. Some prerequisites for this, including knowledge and understanding of the data and records. That includes an understanding of actually what file types there are and understanding how to access the files, because in some situations it may be so old that you need an emulator or an older system to open and understand the file and hopefully upscale it and save it in a forward compatible way. Another prerequisite is knowledge of the hardware, the software, the OS, and the system and how to use it. So ensure that if you are in a managerial spot, that the employees are well versed in the OS, the programming languages, and any other needs that there are in order to engage with the material. Another one is a thorough assessment of the real need to retain data and records. So validate that there is a real need, and once it is established, then you move forward. Identified business and data record owner, and knowledge of the future use, readability, and retrievability requirements. It's best to understand exactly how to access and save the data and make any changes if necessary. To best organize the workflow, it helps to have a checklist. So a decommissioning checklist looks a little like this. First, you have a protection of records. In that protocol, you answer questions like, have the records been mapped to specific records retention categories? Additionally, we want to ask, does the system contain records scheduled for long-term retention? This could include medical data, customer data, records of finance, whatever the case may be. Are there records in the system not covered by an existing records retention category? If that is the case, it may be necessary to investigate the protocols within your organization. What are the bylaws? What are the strategies for dealing with that? And has metadata and system documentation necessary to support the integrity of the records been identified? Requirements relating to the retention of data include: have information architectures been reviewed to ensure all dependencies on the data in this system have been resolved? Are the records, excuse me, information in the system duplicated across multiple systems or repositories? If so, is this a redundant effort? Could be a waste of time. Does the system contain information which is personally identifiable to individuals, especially if you are in a medical facility? HIPAA has very strict regulations in dealing with personally identifiable data. Does the system function as a source of authority for a high value data set? Additionally, we want to ask, does the system contain valuable information about businesses and individual clients' interactions with the organization? And if so, they need to be addressed as well. And does the system contain records or information that otherwise have a high public or commercial value? So when we describe the reintegration of data, understand that data flows from and to live systems, allowing for reprocessing. The structured query transformation involves data that is stored in a database or in some structured format. And read-only data is data that's extracted to save in the long term. For example, PDF files, text files, and other structured data. The requirements can include the migration from the source format into application and the import and export of processes in the receiving organization. And I won't read that whole file there, but if you have questions about it, you can always refer back, and I'll be happy to talk more with you about that. For the migration of data and further retention, the objectives include supporting business needs, maintaining accountability, creating document migration standards, ensure the data integrity, maintain information accessibility. So understand that migration is very system specific, and the methodology should be structured and support the processes of migrating records required to be kept as digital archives. The migrating methodology looks a little like this in the workflow. You have the phase one project planning, and that involves the project startup and the project plan. In phase two migration planning, you're dealing with a migration assessment and the migration plan. In phase three of migration, that breaks down into migration preparation and validation. In project closure, the fourth phase, you're dealing there with the transfer of control, source records, and the project wrap-up processes. Key elements in the migration methodology are dealing with the records retention policy that should be provided for authorized disposal of records that has been used as the input or source records for successful migration. The policy or procedure should define the conditions which must be satisfied before the source records can be destroyed, as well as the guidelines on documenting and preserving additional essential characteristics of digital records through the migration. And in managing residual data, some systems will contain key data and stay in an operational state with reluctance to decommission. Risks to this approach, if this data are, well, it poses a significant privacy risk. It must be handled very carefully and encrypted if possible. It poses significant commercial risks or poses other significant organizational risks. And selecting an archiving pattern, here you can see that it is a process that begins with the strategies and policies and leads to regulatory or legal requirements, mandatory business requirements, and business and system analysis. The pattern decision processes include anything dealing with the file and object, data, database, and graveyard. Its strategies and policies are basically a hard look at the record category, retention period, preservation notice, information sensitivity, and data privacy. Regulatory or legal requirements include the need for retention, regulatory need for analysis and retrieval, and specific regulatory in-market or in-country requirements. For mandatory business requirements, that includes an examination of the life cycle of existing business processes to define users, scope, and frequency, who is the business owner of the data, and what are the existing risks. Business and system analysis can continue to be extracted from legacy system and what formats are available for the extracted data and other concerns. For archiving pattern guidelines, we have categories of the pattern, which is typically dealing with these items, files and objects, structured and unstructured data, structured data, databases, and graveyard, structured, any data that is outdated. And we have a description of each of these and solution examples and when to use. I won't read the whole chart to you. You have that for your notes. In the system decommissioning process, you can see how it starts with key activities of project management, quality management, and requirements gathering and analysis, and leads to standards. And these deliverables include project plans, decommissioning reports, and weekly progress reports. And the deliverables here for the final output include the archival migration plan and test cases. System may have built-in reports that enable data to be printed out, such as PDF, PDA files, which can be moved to a target repository. Where reports are not possible or sufficient to support the type of access, use of data needed, an alternate solution could be investigated. For each decommissioning, a plan should be created with the data owner's input to confirm the requirements for retaining the data, including a look at the scope and the time frame, the archive approach, including the pattern, future use, search, and access needs. And working with IT support, data owners may need to provide things like the input and approval of the data retention and archival requirements, and accountability for the continued ownership and eventual deletion of the archived data and documents, and a timely approval for formal plans and reports. But the greatest plans in the world are useless if they're not put into action. So in putting them into action, you want to establish digital preservation mandates and understand that everybody has a grasp on the processes and they're all on the same page. You want to understand the current situation, evaluate the objectives, and evaluate the state of the organization, define where you want to be, and develop a business case, as well as define and communicate the requirements to all of the stakeholders and team members, and develop and deliver a model that is successful. Wanted to include a real-world study in which old records retention became really important. So I'm going to share something with you. I'm a big fan of Star Trek, and the creator of Star Trek, Gene Roddenberry, has been dead since 93 or 94. And his son had an experience with records retention in terms of his old material. He wrote a lot of his shows right up, including the Next Gen episodes that he was personally involved with on an old computer like this one. It looks like a TSR-80, but I'm not 100% sure. And the records were stored on literal floppy disks. So Gene's son had to save the day and preserve those records for posterity. So the words were found on these 5¼ inch floppies, and it would take a Starfleet level engineer to recover them. So Roddenberry died in 91. Ha, I was right. So, and he apparently left behind a couple of shoebox sized containers of those big floppy disks. And floppies went out of commission long, long ago. Even at some of the ancient areas that I work in, we don't have them. We have the 3¼ floppies. Well, they call them floppies, but they're basically the 3¼ inch. So he contacted a company here that helped him out. So if you used a 5¼ inch floppy off the Serena Jones on Space Station K7, you wouldn't be able to read the files on a modern computer, let alone plug in the drive. So the estate knew of two possible computers the author had used to write the final words. One was sold off at a charity auction, and the second wouldn't boot when it was plugged in. So the Roddenberry estate turned to drive savers, data recovery, and the lack of an operative computer was less than ideal. But they were saved. The majority of the disks were 80s era 5¼ inch double density disk capable of storing 360 kilobits of data, which is mind boggling. A few of the disks were formatted in DOS, but most of them were from an older system called CPM, or Control Program for Microcomputers, a popular operating system of the 70s and 80s that ultimately lost out to DOS. In the 70s and 80s, it was a wild west of disk formats and track layouts. The DOS recoveries were easy once the drive was located, but the CPM disks required more work. They had to actually figure out how to physically read them. The difficult part was CPM and this file system itself and how it was written. As the data recovery firm couldn't get Roddenberry's old computer to power on, it had to sleuth the physical layout of the tracks on the disks. And that took 3 months to reverse engineer. Unfortunately, they didn't have Scotty helping them. Then 30 of the disks were damaged with deep gouges in the magnetic surface. Most of the physical damage was over empty portions of the disk. About 95% of the data was recovered. Besides seeking the technical expertise required for the task, the estate also wanted a high security. The estate wasn't going to just drop all 200 disks off in a FedEx box. Only small batches of disks were doled out at a time, and each batch was hand-delivered to DriveSaver's secure facility in Novato beginning in 2012. And once DriveSavers had secured the data had to be converted into a format that the estate could open. So it's not like you can feed a 1980s era CPM word processor format into Microsoft Word. So each file was converted into a readable text file. All told, 2 to 3 megs of the data was recovered from the 200 floppies. That may seem like a small amount by today's standards, but in the 1980s, the document files were small and Roddenberry's lost words were substantial. And so they had to really reprovision the data and make it readable in modern equipment, which was, I can't imagine the amount of work that went into that. So let's talk a little bit about configuration management, and then I will let you go. The purpose of configuration management is that it helps ensure all requirements are met. It's a look at exactly what needs to be done and what technically needs to be accomplished to get you there. So configuration management, or CM processes, help to maintain the integrity of baselines established throughout the design process. It takes a look at the functional, allocated, and design baselines, and provides adequate technical review so that the intended design meets all functional requirements and is of high quality. The example is the implications of mass creep. It ensures that the hardware is consistent with the accompanying documentation. So design and safety reviews are largely fueled by documentation, but documentation is only as good as the real hardware. There is a 100% correlation between the hardware status and the documentation that lends confidence to the design. On the other hand, discrepancies between documentation and actual hardware cost cast doubt on the entire design, assembly, and integration test cycle. And consistency is ensured between the documentation and the hardware. And so that's a look at decommissioning and replication and reallocating data. So there are some more notes on the material that I'm uploading into files. And so if you guys have any questions, um, you'll have your notes there from the lecture, and you're encouraged to reach out to me anytime. So that's it for now. I hope that this has been an interesting and helpful addendum to your studies. If you guys need anything, let me know. And in the meantime, have a great rest of the weekend. And enjoy the holiday. Memorial Day is coming up, and so if you get Monday off, good for you. I don't. I have to go into work, but that's okay. It's all good. Um, Other than that, that's it, guys. I will see you next week on Tuesday for week 9. Take care, Dr. Dex.